Good afternoon. Hi, everyone. Hope this day finds you well. My name is Dr. Nick Lunig. I'm a CHOP first-year resident going through my pediatrics residency, hoping to eventually be a pediatric cardiologist one day down the line. And I am also the head of Med School Tutors Medical School Admissions advisement branch. And so a little bit about my background. I went to University of Massachusetts Medical School, and during my second year there, I had the opportunity to sit on the advisement committee as a voting member. So I was able to do that for my second, third, and fourth year of medical school, which I loved. It gave me great insight to the medical school application process. I got to know a lot of my future classmates, and it gave me a good idea of what medical schools are really looking for and what it takes to get into medical school these days. As I'm sure you're all very well aware at this point, it's a tough process. It's a long process and can be very tedious, and it can be very stressful. So using those skills, I actually started to work for MST, and for the last 2 to 3 years or so, I've been helping pre-med college students apply and get into medical school. So that's kind of my background there. The goal of today is just to firstly answer any questions that you may all have, and I will answer them as they come in. But I wanted to start with just going over some really commonly asked questions that I myself have been asked working with students for a couple of years, and questions that you may have yourselves. And so the first one, by far the most common question I am asked is, what does it take to get into medical school? What are medical schools looking for? And I can't emphasize this enough. There is no one perfect applicant for medical school. Medical schools like diverse, interesting, and passionate classes. There's no prototypical medical student. And so if you're worried that you weren't a pre-med major, I myself was international studies. If you're worried that you don't have enough, hospital experience, if you don't have enough this or that, I can say that's not really the case. What medical schools are looking for is, firstly and foremost, they want people who are passionate about what they do and about medicine, right? Medical school is really, really hard. Residency is really, really hard, and being a physician in general is really, really hard. And so they want to see that you're dedicated to the profession. You're not just going to make your family happy. You're not just going because it's a high-paying job, which is neither here nor there, but so they want to see a strong passion and a commitment to what you're dedicating the rest of your life to doing. So I'd say that's first and foremost. The second thing they are looking for is certainly someone who's able to handle the academic rigor of medical school. And this, can be in a couple different ways. It certainly is in your MCAT scores, but that's just one metric that they use, and it's by no means kind of the end-all be-all. They put a lot of credit into GPA. They put a lot into credit into what that GPA is reflective of, meaning, were you a physical chemistry major? Did you really push yourself to the hardest and the highest classes? And so those are the other two big things can you handle the academic rigors of medical school? And finally, they just want interesting and passionate students. My roommate was actually a junior Olympic fencer. And I had another roommate in medical school who did a tour in Afghanistan. He was in the military. And so, again, this is just to emphasize they want diverse, interesting backgrounds. They don't necessarily want like the cookie cutter who did biochem and got straight A's and aced the MCAT. That's not really what medical schools are looking for these days. So if you kind of have an alternative background, if where you're coming from isn't typical, that's totally okay. Medical schools love that. They love interesting people. So that's kind of the first big question I'm always asked. The next big question that I want to really, really emphasize this to all y'all, because this is probably the most important aspect of your medical school application. It's the timeline. You can have the perfect application. You can have aced the MCATs and have a 4.0 GPA and volunteered across the country and did this and did that. If you apply late, you are not getting into medical school. And that sounds harsh, but it's true. All medical schools act on a rolling basis, rolling acceptance. And so that means as soon as they get a completed application that they think is qualified for their medical school, they accept them and they're in, and that person's taking up a spot at that class. And as you may know, medical school classes are tiny, right? They're anywhere between 100 and I think the bigger side is 180. This being said, there's not a lot of seats at one particular medical school. And so it's really, really important that you get your application in early, because if you're qualified, they'll accept you, and that's that. If you're late, and when I was on the admissions committee, we would get these wonderful applicants, but we wouldn't get their applications until December. And a lot of medical schools already fill up all of their seats by then. So you're kind of just, if you apply that late, you can find yourself in a position where medical schools are already full. So take out a pen. These are very important dates. I'll give you a minute. Great. So dates that are important this year. May 2nd is when the AMCAS opens. So just over 2 weeks away is when you can first kind of put in your information, your credentials, start uploading your essay, your letters of recommendation, your transcripts, etc. That's May 2nd of this year. Now that date isn't as important as this next one. The next one is the one that you're highlighting, you're starring, you're doing a little smiley face next to, or a frowny face, depending on how stressed you are about this application. And that's June 1st. June 1st is the day that you can submit your application to AMCAS. And what happens after that is AMCAS begins to verify your application, which is to say they start going through your grades, they go through your transcript, they look at your MCAT scores, and they make sure what you reported is actually what you ended up having. Now, this isn't like an FBI background check. They're not going to like call your neighbor and make sure you really lived at this address here or there. But this is a time-consuming process, and so the earlier you submit on that June 1st date, the sooner AMCAS will approve and validate your application. And what happens to students in the past is, I should say, is there's a backlog of applications that start to build up as more and more kids submit. So if you submit on June 1st, your application might be accepted by June 14th. If you submit on June 14th, well, now they have a whole bunch of applications to get through. And so it might be a month or even 2 months before your application gets validated. And so that's all the more reason to submit your application early. Okay, you can really put yourself in a pickle. Even the longer you wait after that June 1st date, the later it's going to be until your application finally gets validated. And then once it gets validated, medical schools will start sending out applications, secondary applications, that is to say. And you can, as soon as you get those, you're allowed to fill them out and then submit them as soon as you're done. And again, earlier is better. As soon as they get that secondary back from you, your application will be considered complete, and they will start looking over it at hopefully their first admissions meeting. And the dates I don't want you to remember, and delete these from your memory, is application deadlines. So the deadline is usually between September, and some go as late as December. That is not important for you, okay? To give yourself the best shot of getting into medical school, don't even look at the absolute deadlines. Apply well before that. So that's kind of my big spiel on timeline. And then the last question I get a lot is regarding where should I apply? How many schools should I apply? What about reaches, safeties, level schools? Where do you stand on that? And so I will say the average, last year in 2017, the average applicant to medical school applied to 17 medical schools, which I do think is a reasonable number. I think there's no one perfect answer because it depends on who you are as an applicant. If you are aiming for a top tier school, I think you'd end up applying to more. If your applicant isn't as competitive, you want to apply to more just to give yourself a better shot. With that being said, more does not equal better, and that is such a common trap I've seen applicants commit. They say, well, there's 42 medical schools in the country. If I apply to all 142, that means I have 142 chances to get into one. That is a fool's errand, and that's for two reasons. One, just to be frank, it's really dang expensive, right? AMCAS charges $39 for each additional school you apply to, and then almost every school has a $50 to $100 secondary applicant fee. So you're looking at, I think the number is, on average, applicants spend $2,800 on the application process alone, and that's before you include travel and hotels and getting a nice fresh suit for all your interviews. So it's a really expensive process, and so it is ultimately best to limit it. The second thing is, just from a logistical standpoint, you're not going to get all your applications done in a timely manner if you're applying to a lot of medical schools. Every single medical school, for the most part, has a secondary application, and while you can reuse some of them, they have general themes. Why medicine? What's a circumstance in which you were challenged? What's something you're most proud of? They almost inevitably have why Dartmouth Medical School, why Harvard Medical School, why UCal Berkeley Medical School. And those are obviously essays that you can't repeat. And so what's going to happen is you're going to get all these secondary essays. You're not going to be able to complete them in a timely manner. And then going back to the importance of the applicant timeline, you're going to fall behind and you're going to put yourself in a tough position. And so it's best to apply to multiple medical schools to give yourself the best chance possible, but also be judicious. Don't just cast an insanely wide net for a school that you actually have no interest in going to, because it's just A, going to cost you money, and B, hurt your application for the schools you do really want to end up at. I just got a question that asking, is it worth applying to reach schools even if you don't have pristine MCAT scores, but your application is otherwise great? And the answer is absolutely, unequivocally yes. We too often, and this is all of medicine, and you'll find it with your step 1 scores and your step 2 scores and your board scores as you go through your career as a physician. Numbers are objective, and so it's really easy to compare them to each other. Like, the mean of MCAT is this, and the average MCAT that people got into med school is that. And so we perseverate on the MCAT scores. That's just one factor in a huge application, and some schools have hard cutoffs, but that's rare. I know for a fact that Harvard Medical School does not have a hard cutoff. They will look at your application regardless of what you got on your MCAT. And so even without wonderful MCAT scores, again, that's just one test of your academic ability, and your GPA is generally much more telling, right? Because that's over 4 years of subjects you were likely interested in. And so I would not limit yourself. I would not cut off schools that you really want to attend from your list because your MCAT score isn't as high as it could be. I would, especially if your application is great otherwise, I would in fact apply to those reach scores. So that was a great question. Thank you. I'm glad you brought that up. And then the last question that I get asked by many students I advise and went through college with is just regarding letters of recommendation. and they say, who do I get them from? What makes a good letter? How do I manage this process? Because that can be a stressful process, right? You're asking a professor, someone you probably don't know incredibly well, and someone who's been grading you and judging you in a sense for a semester or what have you. So one thing I always recommend is sitting down in person with the professor, with the letter writer, and asking for them to write the letter and why you want that letter, what you're hoping to achieve. One, it makes it more personal. Two, it ultimately ends up being resulting in a better letter. The second thing is it doesn't matter who you ask, right? People get in, well, you shouldn't ask your parents. Don't ask your mom for a letter of recommendation, because medical schools probably won't look that highly upon that. But I got letters from my poli-sci professor and from my Italian professor. Nothing to do with medicine, nothing to do with sciences. I asked them because I had a really good relationship with them. They knew me well, and I performed well in their classes. And so I think what students sometimes get into the trap is they ask the most prestigious person they know. They ask the head of a lab or the dean of their School of Arts and Sciences that don't know them at all, but because they have dean before their name, they think that will ultimately end in a better letter. And that's really not the case. When I would read these letters, I knew immediately if the letter writer actually knew the student or was just filling out a form letter and they didn't know them at all. It becomes incredibly transparent. So I would much rather a glowing personal letter of recommendation from your home ec professor than a informal and impersonal letter from some hotshot cancer researcher. And believe me when I say it is so overtly transparent when you ask someone for a letter who doesn't really know you. So something to keep in mind. So that's kind of my big soak. Someone said her mom does know her best and his procedures. That's fine. If that's the case, get a letter from your mom. It'll probably at the very least make you feel good about yourself. I approve of that. But with that being said, if there's no other burning questions, we're going to wrap it up. I hope you found this helpful. I know the process is very strenuous and it can be confusing, especially if you don't have someone to go through it with you. So please feel free to reach out with any other questions. You can reach out to me, or you can reach out to med school tutors, and they'll be able to answer it or divert the question to me. Our email is hq@medschooltutors.com. So just the letter H, the letter Q @medschooltutors.com. And we do have a phone number, 212-327-0098. And really, if you have any questions at all, nothing's too big or too small. As hopefully you could tell from my yelling at my computer screen, I'm really passionate about this. And I remember going through the process 4 years ago. I know how stressful it is. I know how uncertain it can be. And so please, please, please don't hesitate to reach out. And we at Med School Tutors are really dedicated to helping you and making it the best application, putting together the best application you can and giving yourself the best chance of getting into medical school. So thank you all. It's been fun, and if there's no other questions, I'm going to wrap it up. So you all have a good day now. I appreciate it. Bye-bye.